Politics moves faster than ever, and uncertainty is the new normal. Welcome to The Pulse of Politics, the podcast about public affairs and how to navigate an unpredictable world. Each episode brings you real cases, best practices, and a look at how AI is reshaping policy work. Let's get started. Here's your host, Sylvan.
Today's guest is Carlo Lehrell, Senior Advisor at Oxera, strategic consultant, investor, and a seasoned board member with a fascinating career spanning politics, finance, and business. From working alongside Otto von Habsburg in his early political days to managing over $1 billion in assets and later advising top-level organizations on strategy and governance, PC's journey is a masterclass in reinvention and decision-making at the highest level. In this conversation, we explore how historical insight shapes modern strategy, what drives effective leadership across industries, and why intellectual curiosity might just be the ultimate competitive edge. Let's dive into the conversation with Carlo PC Lehrell. PC, very well welcome to the Pulse of Politics podcast. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
I'm very happy to be here.
You originally studied modern history and also philosophy of history in the United States. How did that academic grounding shape your worldview, and when eventually you decided to then have a career in government relations?
Gosh, what a long first question. An understanding of history is what shapes modern politics. If nothing, an understanding of all the political cycles and politics will inform where we are today. Periods of war, of revolution, of horror, and periods of calm and culture alternate in mankind's history all over the world. Peace and order can last hundreds of years in one place, or it can be very short-lived. As an optimist, I believe that people working together for the good of all ensures some of the best outcomes there can be, and to work in government relations is my small chance to contribute positively.
I love that. That's a very beautiful view on things. There was a certain person, Dr. Otto von Habsburg, a man who was born as Crown Prince of the Austrian Empire, who helped you initially get a job in the European Parliament, where he was himself a member. What was that first contact like, and how did it influence your future path from there?
In my first contact, I was struck by his humility. As to how it influenced my path, I start with the fact that to me it's very interesting that you call it the Austrian Empire. He would have preferred a more literal translation of the word Reich, which translates in English into the word wealth or value. And in English, they've used the word in more recent times of commonwealth, a commonwealth of nations, nations that collaborate, that work together to achieve something. This translation underlines that being in it together, as was envisaged in the Holy Roman Commonwealth or the Austrian Commonwealth, for a common or moral good that is not hijacked by some self-interested or self-serving leadership, is the way to go. Now, this is something I learned from Otto von Habsburg, and it's eloquently laid out in his book, Die Reichsidee, if anybody wants to read it. This Weltanschauung, if you like, has shaped much of the rest of my life.
And the political work in the European Parliament, what did you take away from there? I imagine that must have been a new experience starting there.
But of course, going into any parliament is an experience. Parliaments all have processes. And when you go there, you learn the processes of how politics is done and how things are made. Churchill once said that that you don't want to know how two things are made. One is sausages and the other one is politics. But in Parliament, you kind of learn processes. Doesn't matter how junior or how small a wheel you are, you function to a certain order, which ultimately leads to decisions that create laws. But that's true of all parliaments. All parliaments also have some people, of which Habsburg was one, who are the soul of the place. In fact, if you think about it, any large group of human beings has a few people who are not necessarily the leaders, but who everybody respects.
Right. Then after the parliament, your first more major job was as a claims manager in a major shipping insurance business in London. Was the political angle not interesting enough or too boring for you back then that you said, okay, I shift and I go into the business world?
No, there was no planning like that. It just, in between, I also worked in Australia for a while. It's no sort of conscious, clever act to go from one thing to another.
And your employer eventually entrusted you with the job of obtaining a cartel exemption for the entire sector. That sounds, at least from today's perspective, almost like mission impossible. How did the challenge arise and what did it teach you about navigating policy and regulation at the same time?
It sounded like Mission Impossible at the time as well.
I imagine.
I had no idea that the business was part of a cartel until I got called one day out of the blue into the senior partner's office. I'd never met him before. It was like going to visit God. And I was told that I was chosen to help because I was the only person in the entire company who apparently knew something about the European Economic Community, which he sort of looked down on with disdain, I think, possibly. And all of that thanks to a very short time working as an assistant in the European Parliament. The sector had been a cartel for nearly a century, but now needed an official exemption under the rules at the time, the European rules. And what I learned was that in government relations, you don't win by beating the other side. You win by intuitively demonstrating a shared public interest. So our case was very simple. Without this system, which had been in existence for a long time, which country or which government would pay for the oil spills or shipping disasters of the world across all borders worldwide? It wasn't about making profits, it was about responsibility, and that's what won the argument.
I love that. That sounds like the right and the perfect strategy. But then how do you actually execute that in practice?
You execute that well. Again, there are processes in politics, whether they are as simple as go and see the king or through go and persuade a lot of people. You have to inform and educate a lot of people in a first wave of communication of what you're all about and what the issue is. And then depending how they react in a second wave of communication, you defend, argue, and convince.
Then the company, after you successfully obtained the cartel exemption, actually retrained you to become an investment manager, to be part of a small team that managed the company's underlying assets. The investments exceeded 1 billion US dollar, which is already today very nice sum of money, but even then 40 years ago it was even bigger. You then ended up in corporate finance when you realized you preferred individual projects with a clear starting and end point. When did that clarity come?
The clarity came while I was there. In insurance claims, each case is like a self-contained project. An accident happens, you assess the claim, you decide, and you close. In investment management, every day starts again with new set of facts, prices, currencies, returns. Everything is moving all the time, and your job is to get a little extra point of profit before the markets close. These are two completely different disciplines, and some people thrive on that and better at it than I could ever be. I realized I preferred work with a clear start, a middle, and an end, something you could plan for, like a corporate finance deal or a policy project. There's momentum, resolution, and of course, there's a closing dinner. I love closing dinners.
Well, I don't touch. And it's not surprising then that today you're still running multiple projects, as you call them, or as other people would call them, each and every single one of them is like a major job. Can you briefly describe each of your projects and how you even decide which opportunities you pursue?
My current projects. Right. Well, in no particular order. I mean, the group of things I do changes, if not every year, when one ends and something else starts. So, well, first of all, I'm senior advisor at Auxera, which is a European-wide firm of professional microeconomists, mostly specializing in regulation, often that is politically sensitive territory. At a time when facts-based policymaking seems to be going out the window, as all your listeners will know, it's refreshing to work with people who can still tell you what's best empirically. Secondly, for the last 5 years, I co-chair the GARD Group, a network of private climate investors who meet at the UN climate change conferences to look at climate-related investments in the policy context that is driven by that conference. We also visit countries such as India, Africa, and Saudi Arabia. These are the ones at the moment. Places not always seen as central when it comes to climate investment, but absolutely critical to the future also of our planet. And that's one of my 2 pro bono roles. The other pro bono role I have is advising the government of Madeira, helping this outermost region of the EU with certain tax reforms. I'm very happy to be able to help them because I've been a friend of Portugal, and one of my first businesses started in Portugal since the early 1990s. Finally, or just some more, I suppose. I also chair several European consortia in the timber industry, trying to ensure fair competition in trade in a world increasingly enamored, as you know, with tariffs between the EU, China, Brazil, Russia. All of those countries are big players in the wood sector. And finally, I run my small constituency, which is my wife and me, some personal investments, other projects, including at the moment, building a house, which might be the most complex project of all of them.
Wonderful. Thank you for this beautiful overview. I would like to ask a few follow-up questions about the specific projects and the similarities, but also differences. The first one, as a co-chair of a climate investor network, how do politics and regulation actually shape investment flows?
That's not necessarily how it goes. The truth is often the other way around. Think of climate change, whether you think it's fake or real, it doesn't matter, as you would think of a disruptive company. What's a disruptive company? It's something that comes along and finds policy and regulation is not made to deal with it. Yeah. However, the first people that always come to grips with disruption are not the politicians or the regulators, simply because it can take years to change laws and regulation, and that's not fast enough for investment or for dealing with the disruptive thing that comes along. The first to come to grips with the really big issues are finance, the money flows. If finance is convinced that something needs to be done and can be achieved because it can be financed, then politics and regulation follow, not the other way around.
Interesting. I just learned a big piece. You also mentioned that you advised the government of Madeira on tax reform, and at the same time, you also lead within the European timber industry. What unites these seemingly very diverse roles?
They're both regulatory jobs that needed plans. I love working with diverse teams in different sectors. My role is finding and encouraging and trusting to build trust, if you like, to get to the right plan and strategy together with whoever I work for or with, and then nudge people forward to implementation to get to that closing dinner. It requires some leadership along the way, less leadership when you're working alongside great professionals in the field, as I've had the privilege of doing much of my working life.
So I do see the closing dinner as a red thread, but not the only one. How do you balance these different projects? Do you ever have encounter a conflict or do these projects compete for your attention at the same time?
I really do believe that the busiest people always have time. I really believe that. It's an old saying, if you want to get something done, ask a busy person.
Exactly.
You can make time by using the little moments of time that other people throw away. I do not see it as a competition, just an invitation to get as organized as I can, and that is easier to do when you actually enjoy what you're doing. I will leave a company or a project or neglect it if it's no longer enjoyable to work on it. This is worth more to me than any money foregone, or something else will always flow into the gap that's created if I stop doing something.
I love that. And that's actually a perfect segue to also talk a bit about your guiding principles and ethics in action. You once said that your starting point is that every country or place, no matter where in the world, has the same basic needs, such as the need to have roads, hospitals, food and water, defense, etc. How does that mindset or starting point actually guide your cross-border advisory work?
I think I can answer that quite simply. It's much easier to come at something when you look first at what we all have in common from one country to the next. Then, if you look first at what the differences are, a lot of people spend time saying, oh, we're different. You work from the starting point, not by saying words like, in Switzerland, we do things differently. I could have said any other country, by the way. But instead, you need to explore what is the same and then work back and understand the differences.
It sounds so simple in theory, but is it also in practice?
I think so.
Wow. Another thing that really stuck with me from our introductory call is as you go into your project, you always stress the value and also the importance, I would say, of being prepared, grounded in facts and context. Can you share a moment or an example when that discipline made or broke a project?
Well, preparation doesn't guarantee success, but a lack of it almost always guarantees failure. So you must help your luck along a little bit. I do remember, and I think probably many of us who work in the field of government relations will remember clients who want some campaign or some big policy thing or some big meeting done as fast as possible, come what may. It's almost always better that you slow things down. I remember with one particular client checking the data and uncovering some core assumptions that simply didn't hold. Fixing this early turned a potential embarrassment and disaster into a success story. Please think of preparing and facts not as a brake on someone's ambition or an ambition to get things done, but as the thing that makes ambition possible.
I truly admire this philosophy because I think we could need more of that in the world. But unfortunately, I would say we live in an era that is obsessed with instant responses. How do you even hold the line as a supporter, as an advisor on quality, planning, and database decisions when clients usually ask for fast results? Do they even are they open to pay you for that work and don't they demand instant results and sort of
There's no such thing in government relations. There's no silver bullets or anything like that. What is very important is that you are not just a messenger who says whatever a client wants to hear. The first thing I would say to the client who we're just thinking of is, sorry, can't be done. When you work to arrive at the right plan, you use both new tools like AI and old ones like common sense. And you try to keep a holistic 360-degree view around the issues and the context, and you'll get that way to the right decision in the shortest amount of time. One other thing that is also true is that you're only as good as your clients will let you be. If the person insists that it's got to be done tomorrow, the chances are it's not a good idea and it'll fail.
is that then also the moment when you say I might not be the right one for this task and step back?
Look, it depends on the context.
Right.
Most people are, fantastic people who run companies, and the answer I just gave, or if I tell them what I think and why, on the whole, it is accepted. Few clients or senior people or who will just say, okay, well, go away then,
Yeah. I also want to talk a bit about the current challenges that we see around the world, especially here in Europe. Historically, Europe was the once center of the world. How do you see its place now amid shifting global power dynamics?
Europe, the center of the world. Good Lord. What you say is true. Europe was perhaps briefly the center of the world, but really only for a brief moment, and not if you look at it in a global context over any longer period of time. I mean, before Europe had its moment of having empires and running much of the world, there were empires in South America and in Korea and in Mongolia, and in many other nations had their own period of extraordinary cultural and economic flourishings, while Europe and what is now the United States were hardly the center of anything at those times. So this too goes in circles. The real lesson is that power always shifts, and the response is to adapt and not to get fossilized on what we think was the stability of the past just because it's something that we know or knew. To adapt to a modern world and to change is the fun part. Europe is not a museum any more than anywhere else. You can learn from a museum, but those who write too confidently about past or future powers usually make the same mistake, assuming that the story has an end.
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful. You also said that the center of gravity is moving east. What exactly do you mean by east, and how should Europe respond to that?
Well, by East, looked at the world from Europe, I mean the shift of economic and political weight back towards Asia, where it used to be, to China, India, and Southeast Asia. That's where the growth and influence are moving. Europe shouldn't retreat into some sort of box of irrelevance, but it can reinvent itself and re-engage, stay competitive, build partnerships, and use its strength as someone who truly also has standards and values. The goal isn't to create our own standards and values or to obey somebody else's rules because the center of gravity is shifting, but to see what we can contribute and to the common good. And yes, we do have issues, particularly with hard power. However, if we stick together, we have some soft powers that more than make up to it if we exercise them with humility as opposed to arrogance.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation. And how do you see the United States in all of this? It sounds with the shift towards east, the US is also affected in a similar way to Europe, but probably yet different.
The United States is now going through a process of reform, and it is something Europe isn't doing. You can ask whether they're throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but alliances, treaties, institutions, everything is being at least questioned, if not reduced. They will be ahead of us in Europe from a point of view that they will be starting afresh. And we here haven't yet learned how to reform. We want to have all the little things that make us comfortable, but eventually we'll run out of rope. So I'm by no means saying that everything should happen here that's happening in the States, but what I am saying is that we should look both east and west, if you like, to just sort of wake up and say that maybe things do need to change.
What is your strategic view on Europe? Should it align more closely with the US or more with mid-sized European powers such as the UK, Norway, and Switzerland? What is the strategic view here from your perspective?
Well, that's not an either or. Europe's strength comes not from alignment with the US or on values and security, but it also comes from building a more coherent European voice, including being close to partners such as the countries you mentioned, UK, Norway, Switzerland. The real strategy is autonomy through different partnerships, and those can be global, strong enough to work with the US and others as equals, and agile enough to lead in areas where it matters to us. So let's borrow a phrase from an American, oh, yes, we can.
I like that. Talking about that strategic angle and a follow-up question there, to be able to stay flexible, you also need a certain strength to have the freedom to say no to partnerships if they are maybe even in your disadvantage. What does Europe need to have this strength to not lose the grip and become sort of a play ball between the West and the East of it?
It's too large an area, if it sticks together, to become anyone's play ball. And as I think I've said throughout this whole interview, it is staying together, collaborating, deciding together what to do. And yes, that does mean that we need reforms, because if you take the European Union, many of its fundamental mechanisms were created to organize 6 countries and not 27. So we do need to reform certain things, but all I'm saying is we have the ability and the agility if we want to.
What is keeping us from wanting to do that?
You have to ask the politicians.
The collaboration is also very much needed on 2 other topics that keep us busy: populism and climate change. They're both individually reshaping politics. What should Europe's structural priorities be, and where do you see the main political obstacles with the two?
I get back to reform. We have to find a way to reform these institutions that were originally created for something else. We also have to let people into that club and out again if they want to. And we have to be able to accept the consequences of both of those actions. Also, can you imagine a United States or a Russian Federation if each state in both of them, had their own military? It's time to let go of some of those levers, because what will emerge then makes it better for everyone. And that's not something that people who are used to having a certain amount of national feeling easily realize, but it is also true. We're back to that idea of a commonwealth. What most people, I now mean maybe even people on the street, probably most complain about is feeling left out. And if we don't reform, we'll all be left out.
Good point.
So reform, before it's forced upon us by climate, by populism, or simply by the passage of time and history, we can make this better. We have many new tools coming on stream, and we have the possibilities, and we haven't run out of anything yet, including money. There is no need to just throw everything overboard and throw out the baby with the bathwater. As I said earlier, we are, as we're witnessing maybe in the United States, where the administration now also, there are signs that it's beginning to realize what was and what is important, and what we have lessons of history on reform right before our eyes. We should use that moment.
Absolutely. If you look into the future, are you optimistic, neutral, or pessimistic when it comes to the future of Europe?
I'm always optimistic. It's my nature, because if you're going to try and contribute and make something positive, there's no point feeling negative about things or depressed or standing back, because you'll never get anything done. Therefore, optimism is the only way to go.
Very well said. And finally, as you look ahead, do you ever envision retirement for yourself, or is this a continuing mission for you?
Well, I always try to work in such a way that I don't need holidays. Will keep doing my project for as long God will allow me to. My children tell me that I'm past it.
That's the good check to keep things balanced. To wrap things up, PC, we also have some rapid fire questions for you. I'm just gonna fire away. What is one trait that you look for in collaborators or clients?
Curiosity. The best people don't pretend to know much, but they usually ask the right questions. Also, that they're a little bit different. Very conformist people are often not people that are best for government relations. Yep.
Very nice. What's your biggest professional mistake, and what has it taught you?
Like many others, maybe, there were times when I was trying to do everything myself. It taught me that working correctly with others is so much more fun. whether it's at the micro level, you and me, or states. Relationships is an art, not a science to be organized. Yeah.
Who is a historical or living figure that you would like to advise, and why?
I don't know whether he'd need any of my advice, but it would have been special, I think, to work for Nelson Mandela, if only because I perceive that his humility disarmed opponents, it built bridges by giving others dignity. He gained moral authority no force could match. For this reason, I put a very large photograph of him in a government affairs company that I once owned, and I hope that my successors have left it where I put it to continue to inspire such powerful humility. Another lesser-known man of great humility in later life was King Hussein of Jordan, Cardinal Basil Hume in the UK, and of course Otto von Habsburg, who we spoke about. These three I was at least lucky enough to have known reasonably well, and the world is poorer without all of them.
And you mentioned before you try to build a life that you don't need vacation from. Outside of work, how do you recharge and decompress?
Well, what most people don't know about me is that I'm a cold water swimmer. I was wondering whether I could jump into the Seine here in Paris this morning. I do it daily if I can. Nothing clears the mind or recharges. Your battery is better than cold water.
Wonderful. And my last question for you today, what is the most misunderstood aspect of government relations?
People think that it's spin. It's actually strategy. Helping policymakers and everyone concerned to see the chessboard, not the next move. Political consulting is also not who you know, but what you know and how you can get it across for the benefit of all.
Absolutely. PC, I feel you have lived already many more lives than many of us listening to this. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your perspective and view on things. And I wish you lots of success and all the best for the future.
Well, thank you very much, and you're very welcome.
You've been listening to The Pulse of Politics, a Delos podcast about navigating uncertainty in public affairs. For more insights, visit delosanalytica.com.